140 pounds of dog stood between the crib and the door. Nobody asked him to. Nobody trained him to. The Great Dane named Atlas had been sleeping in the hallway since the day Emily and Thomas Brennan brought their daughter Rosie home from the hospital. But on the night of January 9th, he moved inside the nursery and planted himself directly in front of the crib. Emily found him there at the first feeding, just past midnight. She stepped over him, lifted Rosie, nursed her in the glider, and set her back down. Atlas didn't move. His eyes tracked the baby from pickup to return. By the second night, Emily was annoyed. Atlas was blocking the path to the crib. She had to step over a dog the size of a small pony at 2 a.m., half asleep, carrying a newborn. She told Thomas they needed to put Atlas back in the hallway. Thomas agreed. He walked Atlas out of the nursery and closed the door. 12 minutes later, Atlas was scratching at the wood. Not barking. Scratching. A persistent, rhythmic scraping that woke Rosie. On the third night, Emily locked the door. Atlas lay outside it. She could hear his breathing through the gap at the bottom, the slow exhale of a dog who was not sleeping. She told her mother it was separation anxiety. Her mother said get a crate. Her friend who trained service dogs said some large breeds fixate on infants and it becomes compulsive. The intervention was clear: boundary, consistency, redirection. Emily followed the protocol. For 3 nights, Atlas slept in the crate downstairs. He ate less. He stopped greeting Thomas at the door. He lay in the crate with his head on his paws, facing the staircase, ears forward. On the 7th night, Rosie's breathing changed. Emily didn't hear it. The baby monitor was on the nightstand, volume at 4 out of 10, the level she'd set to filter out normal sleep sounds. What she heard was Atlas. He had broken the crate latch. She heard his nails on the stairs, a sound she knew, followed by the scratch at the nursery door. But this time, it wasn't rhythmic. It was frantic, fast, irregular, his full weight throwing against the door between scratches. Thomas got up first. He opened the nursery door and Atlas shot past him to the crib. The dog stood on his hind legs, his front paws on the crib rail, his nose pressed against Rosie's chest. Thomas looked at the baby. She was still. Not the stillness of sleep, the stillness of effort. Her chest pulled inward with each breath, the skin between her ribs sucking tight. A faint whistling sound came from her nose. Emily called 911. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. Rosie's oxygen saturation was at 87% and dropping. They administered nebulized epinephrine in the ambulance. The pediatric pulmonologist at the hospital diagnosed RSV bronchiolitis. The virus had been building for 2 days. What Emily had dismissed as a mild stuffy nose was a progressive narrowing of the infant's lower airways. In a child this age, RSV can go from mild congestion to respiratory failure in hours, the doctor explained. The transition usually happens between 2 and 4 a.m., when parents are sleeping and monitoring is lowest. You caught it early. That matters. Emily sat in the NICU waiting room and did the calculation. Atlas had been sleeping outside the nursery door for 7 nights. He had entered the room on the first night Rosie's breathing changed. He had broken a metal crate latch, climbed a flight of stairs, and thrown himself against a locked door. He hadn't been anxious. He hadn't been fixating. He had been counting her breaths. If you stay for stories about the ones who hear what we can't, subscribe. You're exactly where you belong. 3 days later, Rosie came home. Her oxygen levels were normal. The RSV had cleared. The doctor prescribed a home pulse oximeter for the next 2 weeks. Emily set up the crib the same way, same room, same monitor, same volume setting. She left the nursery door open. Has your dog ever refused to leave a room and you didn't understand why? Tell us in the comments. Someone reading this needs to hear your story. That first night home, Atlas walked into the nursery at 9 p.m. He circled once, lay down in front of the crib, and rested his chin on his paws. Emily stood in the doorway and watched him. His ribs expanded slowly. His ears rotated toward the crib with each of Rosie's exhales. She had tried to keep him out. She had locked the door. She had crated him. She had followed every protocol from every expert. The dog had broken through all of it. Every breath Rosie took, Atlas heard. Every pause between them, he measured. If stories like this mattered to you, subscribe. The ones who listen deserve to be heard. Thomas found the crate latch the next morning. The metal was bent outward at a 40-degree angle. He held it up and looked at Emily. She took it from his hand and dropped it in the trash. Atlas was already upstairs. Emily kept the bent crate latch on the kitchen windowsill for 3 months. Thomas asked her once if she wanted him to throw it away. She said no. The metal was bent outward at a 40-degree angle. The force required to deform a steel latch of that gauge, Emily had looked it up, exceeded what most humans could produce with their bare hands. Atlas had done it with his jaw, in the dark, while locked in a crate in the basement, because a 6-week-old baby's breathing pattern had changed in a room 2 floors above him. The pediatric pulmonologist who managed Rosie's recovery explained that RSV bronchiolitis in neonates follows a predictable escalation curve. The virus colonizes the upper respiratory tract first. The stuffy nose Emily had noticed, but dismissed. Over 36 to 72 hours it migrates to the lower airways, where it causes progressive inflammation and mucus production that narrows the bronchioles. The dangerous transition happens almost exclusively between 2 and 4 a.m., the doctor said. Body temperature drops, respiratory rate slows, and the inflammatory response peaks. The narrowing becomes critical before most parents are aware anything has changed. Atlas had been aware. For 3 consecutive nights he had tried to enter the nursery. Each night Emily had enforced a boundary. Closed door, locked door, crated dog. Each night Atlas had tried harder to reach the room where his nose told him something was wrong. On the 4th night, the night Rosie's oxygen dropped to 87%, Atlas had broken through every barrier between him and that crib. Steel latch, basement stairs, nursery door. The neonatal respiratory therapist who visited the Brennan home for Rosie's follow-up care told Emily something she had already figured out. Atlas hadn't been detecting the virus. He had been detecting the change in Rosie's exhalation chemistry, the volatile organic compounds released by inflamed bronchial tissue, the subtle shift in carbon dioxide ratios that precedes oxygen desaturation. He was counting breaths, the therapist said, not metaphorically, literally. Dogs can detect respiratory rate changes of 2 breaths per minute from across a room. When Rosie's rate dropped from the normal newborn range of 40 into the high 20s, every alarm in his system went off. Emily never rebuilt the crate. She donated it to the animal shelter the following week. The bent latch went with it. She kept the latch for exactly 91 days before deciding that the reminder had served its purpose. The nursery door stayed open. Atlas slept in front of the crib every night for 4 months, until Rosie moved to her own room across the hall. He moved with her, same position, same post, chin on paws, ears forward, counting. The home pulse oximeter beeped twice more in the following 2 weeks, both times confirming oxygen levels in the normal range. False alarms. Electronic noise. Atlas never false alarmed. When he was calm, Rosie was fine. When he wasn't, she wasn't. The machine measured oxygen. The dog measured everything else.